Hey guys, I'm back and welcome back to Countdown to the Cross. We are on day 7. I'm Jen, for those of you who are just picking this up, and we are going through a countdown to the Christ work on the cross. And this can be done any time of the year, whether it's Easter or not when you're listening. But today we're going to be focusing in on the trial. Your readings for today are going to include John 18, 28 through 40, and then John 19, 1 through 6. So, it's one passage there, and it's an account of the trial. And it is very, very difficult to read because for me, it brings forth feelings of almost anger, because this is the biggest misjudgment and the biggest just egregious injustice in the history of the world, right? And so I get a little bit frustrated about it, honestly. And then that turns to grief, and we need to get past that to get to the joy of the story. Okay, so here's the thing. Oftentimes we can look at this as Christ being the victim, and I'm going to encourage you to go through and rationally think about how it is that Christ is the victim in this story. So obviously he was not deserving of the charges that were against him. The Sadducees and the leaders met in silence and quiet and behind closed doors. They let Barabbas go when he was an actual criminal. I mean, there's so many ways in which Christ is the victim here, okay? And that's my first inclination. But then I want you to look a little bit deeper, and let's really think about how it is that Christ was in control the entire time. That let's think of him not as the victim, but as the orchestrator. Because he actually was in control this entire time. He was teaching, he was healing, he was doing the things he knew would lead to this, leading up to it. He knew that doing those things was going to continue this ball rolling towards his eventual death. He stood silent. He stood silent as he was accused. He did that to fulfill prophecy in Isaiah 53. He was calm. He was clear in his message when his opponents were frazzled and frizzled and they were all over the place. So Christ was in control this entire time, and he allowed this to happen in the way that it happened, knowing exactly what was going to happen. And he did that for you and for me. And I just think that in order to look at this passage plainly, we need to try not to think of Christ as the victim as much as the victor, because that's exactly what he is in this story. And then I want us to look at this a little bit at the reasons behind the severity of his punishment. So he was scourged, the Bible says. He was beaten. If you look at historically, this, I could go through the details. I'm not going to because they're super, super gory. But basically, he was beaten with a cat of nine tails. He was beaten. There was glass, stone that was beat into his chest, into his back, rather, that was down to his bone. His blood was literally flowing in the streets. So why? What was the reason for that? He had a spear in his side. He had a crown of thorns on his head. Blood was flowing. And when you stop and think about that, you think about what that actually meant then and what it means now, it's another point of encouragement. There's some scripture references that I have placed in the description of this video and also in your email that you received that point to some prophecies about this that had to be fulfilled, about the blood, but also some ideas about what this blood kind of meant. Blood, I believe it was this sacrificial blood. And the sacrifice was made for us. And what should that do for us? That's the question. And that's the final thing I want you to think on. How does this point you to worship? You can focus on the gore, you can focus on the tragedy of it, but let's focus on the hope and the joy and the gratitude that we have that Christ allowed this to happen, to become the exchange that we've already talked about and we will talk about again on that cross. All right, so I'll be back as we talk about the crucifixion tomorrow. And I encourage you to, at the very least, read these passages, think on them, think on these questions, and then feel free to journal, art journal, however you want to express your worship after that.